Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave, and we'd love to hear where you think we got it right and where you think we just don't know what we're talking about. You can do that by visiting unsilentpodcast.com. You can find us on Rumble. It's got a great comment section, Facebook, other places like that, and we'd love to hear back from you. So, Brian, you're still on the mend from your fun times, and
modern medicine, which Kenny G, and for those who don't know who Kenny G is the guy in the future 70 80 years from now that we're talking to in this podcast. Kenny G will hear my story of modern medicine, which I won't get into too much, and chuckle about it, because by then the knee replacement I had will be antiquated barbaric surgery, I'm sure.
Yeah, he'll just put you in a robot body in that day, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, a robo leg might be a better alternative at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I haven't been paying attention to the news, Dave. So tell me what's going on now.
Well, we are still in the throes of global unrest with tariffs and with trade wars, and although there does seem to be a attempt by the administration to paint this as a little bit of as going to wrap up pretty quick, which of course I think is important. I think the one of the things that you look at Trump and you say, well, what's his management style? And we've talked about this before, but somebody who's a transitional figure like Trump, and anybody that's in this fourth turning era, is going to be a transitional figure who goes in and just shakes things up in ways that people that came before them didn't. And Trump is certainly that way. Now, in this case, he basically just took on the entire planet with his tariff policy and positioned it as, he loves tariffs. Tariffs is the greatest word in the English language, and all of that. Put out a bunch of statements about how the government used to be funded by tariffs, which it did, 100 and some odd years ago. And we're going to be treated fairly, and then lumped every way that we're treated unfairly by others, including some ways that are not really, in my estimation, treating us unfairly, like they buy a lot of our stuff, or we buy a lot of their stuff because they produce a lot of things that we don't produce. Kind of lumping that all into one big basket of saying, hey, you're screwing us, and you better stop screwing us, or else we're going to screw you back. And here we are with we're what, maybe a month into the whole tariff.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Just about, and there's a lot of noise from the administration, and particularly the one that I think is interesting to pay attention to on this is the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who, there's other people who've been talking about it, but I think Bessent is probably the most credible voice on the matter, and he's predicting that the China trade wars will come to an end shortly. And I think that, from my perspective, as I look at the overall effect on things, you have a period of time that you can resolve these things before there's significant damage. But the significant damage, if it goes on, I had my own prediction. I was worrying about online just recently that, look, if we don't have these trade issues pretty well resolved, during the summer, we're going to have a recession by the fall. And I think that's true, because a lot of what's happening right now, if you look at one of the changes that's happening in this period of time is related to the trade wars, but it's related to some other things too, is what they call capital flight. So capital flight is when the money that's invested in our country, specifically from an American perspective, it happens in other countries too, but when the money that's invested in our country is repatriated to the countries that are investing in here. So if you're French investment firm, German investment firm, whatever, or German big company or rich people, you say, the United States, that's where I can make a lot of money. So I'm going to invest my money there. Now, when the United States becomes less attractive as an investment option for a variety of reasons, because you think that the tariffs are going to damage the economy of the United States, which tariffs are inflationary. Tariffs raise the prices. People are arguing about, well, China pays the tariffs or American citizens. Well, the prices go up. That's called inflation. So, this is happening, and in some period of time, it's going to create difficulty for the United States. So people in other countries who've invested tons of money here, trillions of dollars here, are repatriating. They're taking their money out of our country and investing in their own country. Because guess what? There's, if I'm not an investment advisor, and don't take anything I say as an investment advice, there's a disclaimer. The lawyers are law firms happy. We don't have a law firm, do we, Brian? We should probably have a law firm, but we'll
have to look at that someday.
We'll have to look into that. Yeah, when we get over 1 million followers, we'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
But anyway, the when the money leaves our country and is invested in other countries, there's some great deals out there, some good companies in the international market, tons of good companies, and places where you can buy stocks and buy securities that are much less expensive and have great returns and have great financial prowess. And don't have the risk of investing in the United States. Now, why do we care? Well, so we care because if they have, if bunch of their capital is not here, but it's in their own currency, that puts the dollar under pressure. That puts our currency under pressure, which also puts under pressure our status as the reserve currency for the world. The only way that the United States has been able to run up $35 trillion in debt by now is because lots and lots of people have lots and lots of American dollars, and they need to do something with those American dollars because they've bought American stuff and now they've got American dollars. And when that money is not available for them to buy American bonds, American treasuries, then our ability to borrow money becomes limited. And so it's the fact that the U.S. is the reserve, and this gets a little geeky, I suppose, but the fact that the U.S. is the reserve currency for the majority of the planet has given us the ability to run up these debts and to do anything we want in terms of fiscal policy in the United States. When that disappears, or when it becomes, it's not going to disappear. I mean, not overnight. That would take, 50 years for that to disappear, 30 years, whatever. But if that is hindered, then our financial prowess in the world and our ability to continue to live the way that we have on debt significantly lessens our ability. And if we don't have the ability, for instance, to borrow enough money to fund our existing debt, to borrow enough money to fund our military, to borrow enough money to fund our entitlement programs, specifically the in-stone entitlement programs, what do we do? What do we do? So it's a very dangerous situation, and it needs to happen. These things need to be resolved soon because money is leaving the United States. There is a capital outflow out of the United States, and at a certain point, it's like, we took our money. You're England, you're France, you're whatever country, you're United Arab Emirates. You take your money out of the United States, or 10% of, say, hey, we took all this money out. We're making better returns than we were buying inflated American stocks like Apple or Nvidia or Amazon or Microsoft, and nothing bad happened to us. Maybe we'll take more out, and then it doesn't matter what you do with tariffs. I mean, it doesn't matter that much what you do with tariffs because they've already got it in their mind that their former habit of doing most of their investing in the United States is gone. And we don't have a choice. We don't have a bunch of options at that point.
Well, I think all those things you just said are true. I want to throw a couple things at you that it's one of those things that yes and right.
Sure.
So I sold my business in 2021. And I kind of had a path. I'm currently on that same path. I decided to get into a new industry and start a new business and whatever. But also, I started looking at stock trading and like how does this work? Because I really didn't have any idea how it worked. I mean, I always had a 401k from the time I was 19 years old, and like I understood you buy stocks and like stocks go up in price, but I didn't understand a lot of this stuff.
Right.
And so I started buying books and online courses and stuff like that to learn about this stuff. Now, it wasn't. I'm not a day trader. I don't want to be a day trader. That's not my intent. I just want to kind of understand how it works,
Yeah.
and I dabble. Want to be really like dabble like
Yeah.
in the stock markety kind of things. I have a very well equipped, very knowledgeable person who handles my retirement fund, and I don't mess with that stuff at all. They say we're going to do a thing, we do a thing. I don't have any involvement in that. I trust them 100%. But it's kind of a hey, this be kind of fun and kind of a hobby kind of a thing,
Yeah.
and also like I do kind of understand how these economic things work because I just never did. And so there's a few things that in these courses and books and things, if you start learning about financial investing, and again, this would apply to like day traders and things like that, which I don't do, but it applies to those kinds of things. And there's a few fundamental like rules and just like this is the way it works that really shape that you have to reshape how you think if you want to become a day trader. So I'm going to speak as if you wanted to become a day trader, even though I'm not. And again, I don't even know enough to be dangerous. So my knowledge on this is very, very small. But there's a few things that I did learn that have proved to be true. I don't think they're opinions. I think they are more fact than opinion. Now there's a scale there, and where these things are, I don't know. Again, I don't know enough to even be dangerous, right? But there's a couple of fundamental things that really stood. It didn't matter which book it was. It didn't matter which course it was. These things were consistent throughout. One of those is you have to understand how Wall Street works. Now, so I'm going to pose a question to you, Dave. What is Wall Street's job? What do they do?
To generate commissions by trading products for people that have money.
They sell stocks and they make commissions on those things.
Yes. Their job is to make commissions by selling securities.
Yeah, and maybe buy some of those securities and sell those securities and make profit on those things as well. But
yes.
The way these books / courses that they frame this is Wall Street's purpose is to buy and sell stocks.
Sure.
Okay, so it's kind of like a wholesale retail model, right?
Absolutely.
So if you were to wholesale retail widgets, how would you do that? Well, you'd buy the widgets cheap and you'd sell them high. You'd buy low and sell high. Mm-hmm. It's a fundamental part of capitalism. You buy a thing cheap and you sell for more money, you make the profit.
Yep.
This is a fundamental thing that seems intuitive, but it's not. Meaning the people who had the funds available in 2008, let's say, or 2010 or 2012 or whatever, who bought these widgets or stocks then, where are they at now? Well, they've gone up hundreds of percent, maybe thousands of percent. I don't know. I don't know the numbers. This is by design how it works. Mm-hmm. So what happens if you are selling widgets and you bought them for $25 a piece and now you're selling them for $100 a piece, but the market won't pay 101. The market won't pay 105. The market won't pay 110. What do? You don't sell any more widgets.
Right.
So you have to sell what you can at the price you can get. Let's say you only get $90 for the widgets, okay?
Right.
And then you have to wait until you can buy the widgets for $25 again.
Yep.
And then the cycle starts all over again, right?
Yep.
This is how it works. So they buy the thing cheap and they sell it more expensive. Okay, you and I have been talking for months now about how the stock market is overvalued. The valuations are like they're insane. I mean, they're literally insane in some cases, right? That you buy a stock in the old days, you buy a stock and like, okay, I'm going to pay $50 for the stock, and the PE ratio is 10. So in 10 years, I make my money back, and it's all gravy from there. The PE ratios are in the hundreds in some cases. It's ridiculous. So one could make the argument that we're at that peak of what these widgets can be sold for.
Absolutely.
So what has to happen in order for Wall Street to be able to keep the thing going? The prices have to come down.
Yep.
So that's the first fundamental thing that one of the first fundamental things they talk about. The second fundamental thing they talk about is we as humans are inclined to believe things happen for a reason, and that if we pinpoint that reason, we feel good about our decision-making process.
Sure.
So one of the second fundamental things they teach you in these books and courses is, despite what your intuition is telling you, The stock market never goes up in price because of news. Never, ever, 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 ever.
Mm-hmm.
The news might be the trigger.
Sure.
And there's rare exceptions. If a nuclear bomb was dropped in, where I live, then okay, that would probably have impacts on things. But outside of those very outlier scenarios like that,
right,
news does not drive the market pricing. It's the trigger. What drives the market pricing is how Wall Street is positioned.
sure,
Are they positioned long or are they positioned short?
right,
If they're positioned short, they might theoretically wait for a news event to come along because they would position themselves short because the price of the widgets are being sold for $100 and we
right,
can't get 105. Okay, they would then flip to position themselves short, and they would wait theoretically for a appropriate news event that would explain why the prices have to come down. But what
right.
happens is now they can buy the widget at the lower price and then
Cheaper
turn around and
prices.
sell it higher later on, right?
Yep. Sure.
These two fundamental things are somewhat counterintuitive is how it works. We're talking trillions of dollars at
Yeah,
stake
big
here by
money.
very,
Yeah.
very smart people,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
The idea that a Trump tweet would move the market trillions of dollars, it seems like it makes sense, but
Sure.
their thesis is it does not make sense. It's the trigger, it's not the reason. They were positioned for the thing to go down. The news event happens, we can say that's why, and it goes down. So like, and you can look at back in history and see where this happened. Like,
Yeah.
Unemployment reports come out. You could have a good unemployment report come out and the market goes down. Well,
Sure.
that doesn't make any sense. The market should always go up
Right.
when the unemployment reports are favorable, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they go down. Well, why is that? Is low unemployment bad news? No, it's because Wall Street was positioned short.
Right. Yeah. And
Right?
and I think a lot of what happens is because and that all of that particularly applies when you're talking about the massive amounts of flows that Wall Street has. I mean, so
Right.
because the way that you and I interpret things is going to be on a more of an individualized basis, which we individuals would respond to news, but the big ones is like, wow, if I have an excuse to sell off, half a billion dollars or $5 billion of this, then yeah, that puts me in a much better position because, well, in the part of what I've said for a while around this is we've needed a correction for quite some time. I mean, typically 5 to 7 years, you have a market correction. You've got you got a recession that comes, kind of brings things down a bit. Things can go back up again. We have 15 years, well, 17 years now, quantitative easing from the Federal Reserve, and without basically any correction, the stock market just keeps going up and up and up. And you're right, the smart people recognize that at some point the stock market's got to reflect value.
Well, but also more importantly, you can only buy so many widgets at one time.
Right.
If widgets are $25 and you only have $2,500, you can only buy 100 widgets.
Right.
So you run out of widgets to sell, but you need more widgets to make your business go.
Right.
So you have to sell some other kind of thing, or the news happens and like, oh my, things are falling apart, and like the price goes down, and I can reload on widgets again.
Right.
This is how it works, right? But we, as just generic lay people who don't know anything about anything, I'm speaking for myself here, believe that the news event is what made this happen.
Sure.
It couldn't happen if they weren't positioned for the thing to happen.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
And that's crony capitalism. That's the very definition of cronyism on a macro level.
So all of that to get back to my personal thesis, which again, I don't know enough even to be dangerous. So like, don't listen to me about any of this stuff. But my personal thesis is it can't go much higher, right? It being the whatever, if you want to call it the stock market, if you want to call it the global economic whatever in the U.S., like however you want to phrase that, it can't go much higher. It can always go some higher, but it's not going to go another 30% higher before there's some kind of correction. That seems pretty silly. A correction has to happen now. So the question is, what will be the trigger? Not the reason, but the trigger.
Sure.
And Trump has given some triggers. He's offered plenty of things that allow these things to gyrate in pretty massive ways. Also, if you look at the pattern over the last few weeks or a couple of months, it looks eerily reminiscent of 1929, where there's a big fall and then a big sharp, a big sharp bounce, and then another big fall, another like this erratic behavior. This is not the first year it's ever happened. It's happened many, many times like this, going back to the 1700s, that you can see charts of how this has happened over and over and over again. So my thesis is if the tariff thing gets resolved, which I hope it does, I mean, truly, like people's jobs are at stake, and it's very uncomfortable for lots of people. If a magic wand was waved by somebody and that got resolved, fine. It doesn't mean the reason goes away. It means that trigger went away.
Yeah.
Right. And part of what you and I talk about is things are not sustainable. They're not working anymore.
Right.
And all these ugly things are likely or necessary, however you want to look at it, to happen.
Yeah.
Because it's built upon sand. It's a house of cards built upon sand at this point.
Yeah.
And so I guess all that to say, I don't have the confidence that the tariff thing goes away, our problems are solved in the economy.
Oh, certainly
and
not.
and I don't have the confidence to say that the tariffs are the reason. He's given him a great excuse. There's no question.
For sure. Yeah.
But I'm also like, okay, you can't be selling, stocks at a 343 PE ratio. Like that's not sustainable. That has to come down, and that's the reason. But the trigger will be whatever the news event of the day is that can justify that kind of. Now, I hope I'm not being too cynical, and I hope I'm not explaining that poorly, which I'm probably doing too much of both.
Well, no, I mean, I think there's like with all these issues, most of the discussions I've had online about the tariffs have been unsatisfying to people because I will take a partially pro-tariff perspective in the first part of my post and a partially anti-tariff perspective in the last part of my post, so they don't know what team I'm on, and so they don't know whether they should like me or yell at me. And so so my
Well, they have good historical data with you to figure that out.
well,
Probably.
yeah, they can go back, but people are lazy. They don't do that. Anybody? Well, Dave, I don't know where you're coming from. Well, that's just because you're lazy. You don't go back and look at my posts. You can figure exactly where I'm coming from because I'm kind of transparent about this stuff. But I think the point of that is that with things like tariff, with all of these things, where everything becomes a caricature and a cartoon.
Yep.
And tariffs are a good example. Tariffs in the stock market are both good examples of things that should not be cartoons or caricatures. They should be dealt with with precision and with intention and all of that, because you don't have, I mean, I'll give you an example. I did a little bit of I don't have a big portfolio, so I'm not a day trader, I'm not a big investor, but I'm like, wow, these gold mining stocks, like this one gold mining stock, the PE is 5.5. They throw off dividends, and they got no debt. I mean, what's wrong as a business person?
Yeah.
Why did 5.5?
Solid investment.
Yeah, when Apple's revenues are declining and they've got a PE in the mid 30s or something like that. It's like, that doesn't make sense. But because of the way people look at these things in these cartoonish ways, are tariffs good or bad? I had this discussion just today. Are tariffs good or bad? No. No, what? Tariffs are not good. They're not bad. They're a tool. And yes, we should tariff some stuff from China. No, we shouldn't tariff our drugs from China right now because we can't make them here yet. Maybe wait until we can. It's like, don't quit your job until you get another job. It's stupid.
And I also think that like you and I talked about a lot about this last week. So I don't know if we need to dwell on too much today, but Trump is a shoot from the hip impulsive guy. There's no question about it.
Exactly.
And I could totally see, given how broken things are and how the world order is just not really working for really much of any, other than a small, tiny cohort of people. It's not really working for anyone. I could totally see just being like, you know what? It's going to suck no matter what we do.
Yeah.
What do we think the top 3 to 5 things we can do to try to make some progress, try to make some movements, and find out what China's red line in the sand is?
Right.
And just like, let's just find out how committed they are. This they it could have been I don't want to use the word ploy like it's just like a willy-nilly thing, but it's not like they have an infinite number of options to try to rectify some of this stuff, And so they might have said, well, we got 3 options. Tariffs is one of them, and we have these 2 other things. What do we think is the most likely to be beneficial? Maybe get some kind of resolution and or figure out where China's really drawing a line, and this may be that. That's completely separate of the Wall Street stuff. That's completely separate of the stock market, all that stuff. They might be hemmed in ways that you and I can't even comprehend. I wouldn't be surprised by that.
Well,
it could be a Hail Mary. I don't know. I have no idea. I do know that I'm not willing to concede that the trillions of dollars of things were lost because of Trump tweets about tariffs.
Sure,
Not
sure.
willing to go that far.
Yeah, no, well, I think that's also a vast oversimplification to say that as well. And I mean, I think I think we know enough about Trump to know that he's the kind of personality that loves a good game of chicken. You know,
Yeah.
he loves to, get in the old Buick, 68 Buick with a 400 liter. I mean, it's just we're gonna go. and
Yeah.
and so he's probably in. How do you know where she's gonna be? Well, we'll just play chicken with China for a while. Let's put tariffs on everybody else, so she doesn't think we're just attacking him, that this
Yeah.
is all part of our big plan. Let's play. I could see that this could be the whole tariff regime could very well be aimed at Europe and China, and everybody else is just like, let's put tariffs on them too, see if we can get some better trade deals.
Soften the blow.
But
Yeah.
we're gonna make it a big deal so they don't think we're coming after them by themselves.
Yeah. The tell for me is I 100% believe that Trump is vain. I know that sounds harsh, but I do believe that. And I think that he does look at the stock market as an indicator of how he's doing.
Yes.
So the tell for me is he has some smart people around him, and he's a pretty smart guy himself in the world of finance in ways that I'm never going to be. For him to be willing to sacrifice that tells me he doesn't have a plethora of other options.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And
Yeah.
I
Is that a
think
fair assessment based on my limited knowledge? Probably not. But people have tells.
Yeah.
You don't give a thing you really care about that is your indicator of how well you're doing unless you absolutely have to.
Right.
And so again, I just kind of go back to, well, I don't think they have a lot of options. I think this is going to suck. The tariff thing is going to suck. I also think the same thing's got to get worked out.
Yep.
And I also think that there's no shortage of people in Wall Street who didn't vote for Trump, who had a pretty good life before
Sure.
and are looking for ways to make him look bad. And
Yeah.
all those things can be true once. He could be doing something that's absolutely a bonehead decision, and people could be capitalizing on to make him look bad. I think all those things are probably true at one time.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure in every one of these situations, it's multiple layers it's multi-layered chess. Now, Trump is more of a boxing guy than a chess guy, I think.
For sure.
So it's like all these notions of him playing 4D chess and stuff. I don't see it that way. It's like, let's do tariffs. Okay, let's do tariffs. Tariffs aren't working. Let's change. Okay,
Yeah, let's stop doing tariffs. Okay, well,
let's stop doing tariffs.
right on to the next thing. Yeah.
And then let's say, yeah, we stopped. Yeah, we stopped doing tariffs. That's because they blinked. How'd they blink? They just blinked. Shut up. Go away.
Yeah.
That's kind of I think how this ends up playing out. And the best scenario for us is if, I mean, under the umbrella of the fourth turning crisis era that we're in, there's things are going to get bad. The only question is how bad. And
Yeah.
the thing that I hope for out of all this is that what comes of it is that things are a little less bad than they would have been otherwise. I mean,
And I think that's the thing that I would say that as a people we are misguided on. And I hate to say this stuff because it sounds so pessimistic. And I'm not a pessimistic person. I'm also like, I feel like we have these conversations for a reason. I don't talk about the
Yeah.
fourth turning because I think it's nonsense. I think it's meaningful. I think
Absolutely.
it's turned out to be pretty true. So in these moments, not only is the question how bad is it going to be, but also the questions are going to be who and what are to blame.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so we're very simplistic in this stuff and how we operate,
Yeah.
right? So there's that, and then I think the main thing that I think that we are misguided on is believing that a tariff like thing, whether it's tariffs or something else, is the silver bullet who's going to get us out of this. And
Right.
I think
Right.
that's absolutely true. I think and we'll never know if things get horribly bad, if they could have been more or less horribly bad if the tariff thing wasn't part of the equation. We'll never know that stuff.
No.
But the idea that the tariffs are going to solve or cause all the problems and whatever severity happens, I think is absolutely ludicrous.
Right. No, I totally agree. A lot of it has to do, I think, with the speed at which things unravel. So, the question of, do you have, if you're going into a recession, as an example, do you have a soft landing or a hard landing?
Yeah.
And the question at that point is not whether you're going to have that kind of recessionary impulse, but it's just how bad it's going to be. And so
Right.
I think that's where all the policies and all of that can come into play, to say, okay, we're going to hopefully, and I don't think anybody knows. I don't think anybody on earth knows how all this is going to play out, because there's so many competing
Yeah.
impulses. You've got nationalization happening across the entire planet, which affects repatriation of money across the entire planet, which then goes to the tariff regimes, which then goes to ideological turmoil. So you've got, like, in the Middle East, you've got the United Arab Emirates that
Yep.
are, by and large, one of the most successful regimes. They're, a great soft power regime throughout the entire Middle East, but they're trying to influence things in Sudan. And there is a point to this little rabbit trail I'm on. They're trying to influence things in Sudan in more of a hard power way because of ideology. So even if you are rich and you have significant resources and significant position, sometimes you're willing to sacrifice some of that for ideological reasons, just because you're
Yep.
angry at somebody else. It's just like, the what was it, the people that are keying Teslas, who are not, homeless drug addicts, but are, college professors and, people with, six-figure jobs and all of this. Well, why would you do that and cost yourself money and reputation, maybe go to jail and all this, because you've got a lot to lose, but you're still willing to do that
Yeah.
because you're so ideologically in turmoil that it just controls your life.
Yeah.
And so you've got that aspect of it too. So that's where trying to understand all of these things, all these moves, and people's reactions to these moves, and nations' reactions to these moves, are are also very dangerous, because sometimes people will act in not their own best interest. So let
Yeah.
me give you another example of that one, that seemed logical at the time, but turned out very poorly for the actors involved. At the end of the day, the attack on Pearl Harbor in the start of World War II, for us, was over oil. It ultimately
Right.
was over oil. The Japanese Empire could not get enough oil. We were helping to prevent that. We were making sure that they didn't get enough oil through trade policy. It was our
Yep.
trade policy. And now it turned out that, as we know from history now, that didn't work out very well for Japan, because they
Yeah.
didn't understand our industrial capacity. But they felt like and this is not to excuse the attack on Pearl Harbor or Imperial Japan's imperialism or anything like that, but they felt that they had no choice, because
Yeah.
we pushed them too far in a certain direction. Now, what that game of chicken Japan lost, in the current environment that we're in this game of chicken we're playing with the CCP, um, you know, you hope it doesn't turn from a trade war into a hot war, but it
Right.
could. Just because there
Yeah.
are examples of, you push somebody too far, they believe they're suffering, they can point to somebody who says they're causing our suffering, so we're going to go shoot them. We're
Yeah.
physically going to shoot them.
But what's funny about you bringing up the Pearl Harbor example is that's a non-Wall Street illustration of what I talked about earlier, of the reason versus the trigger, the news
Sure.
event that's the trigger,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
We
Exactly.
now know that FDR was in a situation where the vast majority of the American population in World War II did not want to get involved.
Right.
He also knew it was inevitable we did get involved.
Of course.
We had also been preparing to get involved.
Yep.
So what did we need? We needed a trigger.
Yep.
And what did Pearl Harbor provide?
It
The
provided the
trigger.
trigger. Yep.
There's lots of information out there now that he knew something. He didn't know
Sure.
exactly what, but he knew something was coming, and they didn't do things to prevent it. Why?
Right.
Because he needed the trigger that would sway the population's opinion and it'll give him permission to do the thing he knew he
He knew he had to
wanted
do anyway.
/ needed to do.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Same exact thing as what I was describing 30 minutes ago with
Right.
we were positioned. We just needed the news event that made the trigger. Now, that's a very cynical way to look at things, but also there's enough data out there to support that
Sure.
thesis. And whether that's 100% true or not, I don't know. But there's plenty of data out there that shows that FDR knew it was coming. They chose not to do
Yes.
preemptive things to prevent it. And the population was against it. And then the next day, on December 8th, 1941,
Yep.
we were
Everybody's
all
for it.
in.
Yep.
Everybody's all in, right?
That's right.
The second thing, like you were talking about people doing things for ideological reasons, I'll give you the opposite extreme of that, of people doing things for selfish reasons. Like let's talk about your like the Sudan example or the Japan example of like valuations of assets. So if the American stock market was widgets and you bought a bunch of widgets in 2008 and you made a pile of money in 2000 between then and 2025, that means that other countries, or companies, if you want to use like an analogy, let's say Japan sold hula hoops and Sudan sold speakers. Okay, if everybody's putting their money in the American widget machine, that means they had to lower the price of the hula hoops and the speakers because to make people buy more of those things. So at the same time, we're making a pile of money on these things and widgets. The cost basis of the other stuff is going down. So when we sell our widgets at the peak of the market, now we can go buy the widgets or the hula hoops and speakers at super cheap prices. And then when those things start going up, hey, what happens? We bought low, we sold high again.
Right.
Now, again, that's a very cynical way to look at it. And I'm also inclined to believe that people with lots of money do things to make more money.
Sure, 100%. I mean, that is. I don't think it's arguable. I think that exactly is what
So
happens.
I think you could almost, if you wanted to, Dave, make an argument that maybe this is how this stuff goes because this is how people want this to go.
Well, yeah, because I think if you've got billions or trillions of dollars, how are you going there? There's always the impulse to get more. I mean, human nature is I've got $1 billion, I want two. I've got 10, I want, I mean,
right. Well, I mean, as business owners, you set a goal your first launch. Hey, if I could do $1 million a year in revenue, man, I'll be really doing something. And then pretty soon you're doing $850,000 a year in revenue. You're like, well, $1 million's not going to make that big impact on my life. I want to do 10,
exactly,
or 5 or whatever. And so you set a goal for 5, and then pretty soon you're doing 3.75. You're like, well, 5, that's not great anymore. It's how we are.
Yeah.
It's how we're wired. It's how our brains work. And you look for opportunities unless you can create them. And if you can create them, you create opportunities.
Well, and see, that's where if there's a ton of money, you're in a position where you can't necessarily do what you did to get the ton of money. You have to do it differently. In other words, if you're a Steve Jobs and you create this amazing company that's worth $1 trillion, you're not going to go out and go back to your garage and create another company like that. All you have at that point is you've got money. So what do? You leverage the money somehow. You have to, anytime somebody's got billions or trillions of dollars, it then becomes about leverage. It doesn't. So why is Bill Gates, as an example, why does Bill Gates give away billions and billions and billions and billions? He keeps giving away billions and billions and billions. And he just seems to have this never-ending source of money. Yeah, he's not the richest guy in the world anymore, but he's one of the top richest guys in the world after he's given away, hundreds of millions of dollars because he knows how to leverage his money. And that's where the sort of the negative impulse, if you will, to cynically leverage your money comes in. Okay, I'm going to make a market. I'm going to invest $100 million in this stock, and I'm going to drive it way up, and then I'm going to, it's getting driven up, and now I'm going to sell it off, make another $10 million on top of that, and now I've got 110, and I never had any interest in the stock in the first place, or never thought it was a value in the first place. I just leveraged my money to make more money, and that's where that sort of well, that's the part of capitalism. I'm a firm committed capitalist. I prefer to use the word free market, but that's where the capitalism gets kind of a bad name because you can use the money, use those massive lumps of money to make money in unproductive, shall we say, unproductive leveraged ways.
Yeah. Well, I kind of go back to Milton Friedman when he was talking to Phil Donahue, that one clip we played, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months ago, whatever it was, of Phil Donahue in 1985 or whenever it was, talking about, well, don't you ever feel bad about the greed that for people in this capitalistic society? And Milton Friedman said, which societies don't have greed? which societies are not run on greed? You
Right.
know, so yes, in a capitalistic society, this is how it manifests.
Right.
But in an uncapitalistic society, the greed is still there,
Still there,
and
of
some
course.
other version of people leveraging, taking advantage of other people's
Yeah.
situations would happen. It just wouldn't look like this, but it doesn't mean the greed goes away. We're
Right.
still human beings making these decisions, and we still want more than Joe next door.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in every society, there's a presidential palace that's really
Yeah.
nice, even if 99.99% of the population lives
Yeah.
in poverty. I'm sure that
Yeah.
Cubans, they're all driving anybody who's got a car is driving a 1956 Chevy, but not the Castros, so that's just
Yeah.
kind of the way
Yeah.
things work.
Well, I didn't mean to spend this much time on economics. I barely can even I understand about 1/10 of 1% of what's actually happening. But shifting gears, I do want to get this other thing before too
Yeah,
much time passes. A couple of weeks ago, Bill Maher went to see Trump at the White House,
yeah,
which I found to be refreshing and remarkable and all those things. But not just that he went, but what he said after he went.
right,
And essentially, what I walked away, there's like I don't know, 15 minutes worth of clips I watched a couple weeks ago when this happened. But essentially, what I gleaned from that was the Trump he met in the White House was not the public persona Trump,
right,
and he basically says, well, he actually says, why the f can't we have this guy
right,
at the podium,
right,
basically, right?
exactly.
And so I was super happy that it's just so funny. It's so American how this happened. Kid Rock brokered this meeting.
Yes, I know Kid Rock, the ultimate diplomat.
So, like, what's more American than that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kid Rock is the one who brokers this meeting between these staunch opponents
Right.
ideologically, and then Maher goes, to his credit. I got to give him credit, and
Oh, yeah.
I like Bill Maher in some ways, and he
Yeah,
drives me crazy in others.
sure.
Just like with Trump, okay, so and like I do with people. I mean, it's just how it is, right? Um, but he went, and I got to give him a lot of credit for that. He took a lot of shit for going. Like
Oh, big
people
time.
in his tribe were not happy that he went, and
No.
then they were really not happy when he came out and said fairly nice things about the guy.
Yeah.
But then he kind of like, from his perspective, like, why can't you be that guy out on the podium? And I thought that
Right.
was really fascinating. That's how it all kind of unfolded.
Yeah, I love the way he started it. I mean, yeah, I have the same feeling about Maher. There's some things that he says that I'm like, dude, you're a moron. But on the flip side of that, I mean, he's honest. He seems to me, my
100%
judgment
on. Yeah,
of
I do
Maher
believe that. Yeah.
is he's just 100% honest, even if it costs him, even if it costs him within his tribe. So the first part that because I heard his entire recount of that, Mars' entire recount of that afterwards, and he said that he went there with a printout of all
Yeah.
the things, like 60 different times
Yeah.
that Trump said something like, "Oh, he's failing
Horrible about him.
comedian,"
Yeah.
all that, and he had him autograph it. I mean, first of all, going to the most powerful person in the world and saying, "Here's all the things you've ever said that's bad about me. Would you autograph it, please?" And apparently, Trump did it. He autographed it. He thought it
I'm
was
looking at the picture
hilarious.
on my other screen here of Trump autographing that thing. So again, how much more American can you get
Well,
than that? Like
that's exactly it.
this is
That's
free speech on all fronts, like really coming to life in a way that
see,
I don't think any other country could do something like
and
this.
those were exactly my thoughts, Brian. In any other country, take him out to the guillotine. I mean, any other place, it's like
Yeah.
there's no way, or there'd somebody be offended. Apparently, Trump laughed about the
Or
whole
at least
thing.
privately shame him. Like, dude, you're in the White House. You don't bring this to the White House.
Right, to the
I
most
mean, if it was another country, another setting or whatever,
right.
none of that. I thought it was fantastic on all kinds of fronts. It gives me a little glimmer of hope that
Yeah,
whatever this resolution will be, we'll still all be Americans. And
yeah,
honestly, at this point, that's kind of what I'm hanging my hat on. Is like, I know bad things are going to happen. Neil Howe, who wrote the book The Fourth Turning, has said, like, in every fourth turning, there's been a major global kinetic,
yep,
war. I mean,
yep,
I hate to use this language, but it's the
sure.
truth. So I
It's
like dancing
history.
around it is making sense. And we can look at the last two fourth turnings in during World War II. Well, the biggest stock market crash in our country's history happened then.
Yep,
And I'm gonna guess around the Civil War, economically things weren't all that sound then
sure.
either.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so all these things are like we do have historical data to show us kind of how the roadmap is. The one, and so I'm it's going to cripple me like everybody else
Sure.
financially and in other ways. That
Yeah.
if and when this stuff goes down that path, and I don't want that, but
Yeah.
I'm also not going to pretend like it's not a possibility or even likelihood.
Right.
The one thing I'm hanging my hat on, Dave, is at the end of this, we'll still all be Americans. I
Yeah.
do not want to end up like your example of Greece and Macedonia and like
Yeah.
all the little fractured countries in Europe that used to, I really am holding out hope that we emerge from this all one group of Americans who are proud to be American again.
And I think history tends towards that outcome. I do think. I mean, I think it was in the fourth turning or was it in pendulum? So we're in the third American Republic right now, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so there were the first American Republic was what happened when the American Republic was established in the first place after the Revolutionary War. The Second American Republic after the Civil War. Third American Republic in FDR's time and forward till today. So what comes out of it, but in every one of those um, we've maintained a constitutional republic of some sort.
Yep.
The flavor is significantly different than the previous one. So the Third American Republic is significantly different than the Second American Republic, but there's still free speech
Yep.
as a principle. So there's still the American principle. So I'm hoping, and I think it is. I think it is likely, and maybe that's just optimistic on my part, but I think it is likely that Americanism will survive and will continue in some and maybe it will be in a different form than what we have today
Yeah.
because it's just that's what happens each time.
Well,
I
I mean, if
have
nothing else, technology is going to drive a lot of that. I mean,
Yeah,
there's just so
technology is going to
many
drive a lot.
variables and factors and driving forces,
Yeah,
and to
AI,
pinpoint one and say it's
robotics.
monetary or ideology or technology, it's all those things.
Yeah, it's going to be all those things. And I happen to believe, I think, and again, I've said this before on the podcast. I think it might be more akin to either a declared empire or a more structured hegemony. I mean, I could be again, I could be wrong on that. I'm just projecting. The alternative to that is that you've got a a decreased America that's still America, but a significantly decreased America and a century or two of wild west globalism, where
Yeah.
every nation for themselves. So I could see that being an outcome too, in which
What I don't think is the likely outcome is we emerge from whatever this is going to look like, and America and China are still the two dominant powers.
right.
And in some kind of version of what we have now, where there's kind of this stalemate, this
Yeah, I don't.
tensious kind of.
Right.
I don't think that's likely. I think
Yeah, I don't
we're gonna
suspect so either.
dramatically go down the communism slash socialism slash whatever ism path much more globally, which would include our
Right.
country,
Yep.
or people are going to emerge, and America's still going to be the beacon
Right.
of freedom, and more countries will gravitate towards that modality. I don't think this stalemate thing. I can't imagine an 80-year period where there's the Western Hemisphere who has capitalistic views and the Eastern Hemisphere doesn't. I don't think that's likely. I
Yeah.
think a lot of those things are going to be shaken up.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there'll be new power structures
Oh
that
yeah,
exist. I mean, just like if you look back 115 years, a lot of the power structures and wealth of the world was centered in empires: the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman
yep,
Empire, the Russian Empire. It was all empires. And then 15, 20 years later, the wealth of those things was gone. The empires, their power structures were gone. I mean, a
yeah.
whole different set
But
of power
what made a
structures.
country what made the country able to be an empire was population,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
You Well, with technology, that's changing. I read something a few weeks ago where you take a country like Taiwan. They have a very small population, but
Yeah.
they have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And if defense, national defense and things like that is going to be about drones. Well, it's who can buy the most drones, not who can produce the most humans.
Yeah.
So a country like Taiwan might emerge as some kind of superpower because
Sure.
wealth will determine who can be an empire, not headcount.
Wealth and technological prowess. So you take a look
Right.
at places like Singapore, which is a city state. It's not even, I mean,
Right.
it's a country, but it's basically a city. It's just a big island city. So they could be, and
Or like, what if Hong Kong broke away from China? That
yeah,
they're very wealthy there.
yeah,
There's there's these small countries that have never had the population to allow for an empire. But they
Right.
got a lot of money. I mean,
Well, and see, the other thing in the past, it was population. That's true, but it was population and culture. So there was, what allowed Japan to be what they were, the imperial Japan, what allowed that to exist was not a massive population, but an incredibly, monomaniacal culture. So,
yeah,
but the thing in the 21st century that argues against that being as big a factor is culture has been subsumed to a certain extent under globalism. I mean, you still have in a very, you've got a very almost xenophobic culture in to a certain extent. Pardon me, Japanese people in Japan, and you've got, I mean, you could say that a lot of the reason for Russia doing the things that Russia's doing under Putin and supporting Putin is because of Russian culture. So
right.
and you could say that America's success, a lot of America's success, is still because of culture. So there's there's a cultural component in that, but I don't think the cultural component is necessarily going to be as strong, or I don't know, I could be wrong on that. It may not be as strong in the next go around because of technology sort of pushing culture to a third position from the second or first position it has been in the past.
Yeah, well, and cultures might shift. Maybe some of these cultures don't have this empiristic thought process
Yeah,
because it's never been on the table.
sure.
All of a sudden, you get in a situation where overnight in a few short years, you go from not being able to do that to being able to do that. That might change the
Yeah.
culture and how they approach those kinds of things.
Well, and you can see I mean, you look at how Germany is changing. And on a dime, Germany is changing.
Yeah,
They've basically taken off what they call the debt brake. They haven't allowed themselves to go into debt. They've been the conservative people, and now they're like, we got to get rid of that. We got to defend ourselves. They've been a pacifist culture, and now they're going to invest, and rightly so. I mean, they had to be after two world wars. It's understandable
yeah,
that they would have been where they're at, but they still have hundreds and hundreds of years of Germanic, kind of history behind them. Is it possible that they emerge as there's a Germanic European empire? So all these
yeah,
things. I mean, I'm not excited about the difficulties that are around the corner on the horizon, but it'll be very fascinating to see how all of this shapes up. To be here for the
yeah.
shaping of history that will take us up to Kenny G's day.
Yeah, no, there's no question. It's going to be painful, but you can't say it won't be fascinating to watch. That's for
Exactly right.
sure.
I just hope I have enough hot dogs.
Yes. Well, as Dave mentioned in the beginning, we'd love to get your input. Again, we're trying to explain to future generations what this moment in time is like, as they undoubtedly look back and say, "What the hell were those people thinking?" And we try to capture things that won't be in history books, like what's the vibe, what's the mood, what's going on that won't be written about 50 years from now. So if there's things that we talked about you think we got right, we'd love to hear about that. And if there's things you think we talked about that we completely missed, we'd love to hear about that too. Dave and I can only give our perspective. We'd love to have other perspectives for Kenny G and his ilk to look back on in the future. So with that, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.